That's the thing I like about you.
Okay, so this is usually a 2-hour presentation, so I'm going to cram it into an hour. A lot of the slides I'm just going to pass over, but I will, touch a little bit on each of the slides. I'm only going to show one video. I usually show 2 or 3 videos just to give you a feel of what these children, immigrant children, are going through. So, as she says, let me just go through the objectives. I'm hoping that after this, you'll have an increased knowledge on assessing immigrant children in terms of pre-migration, migration, and post-migration, the 3 areas that you really need to touch upon when you're assessing and working with immigrant children and families. Hopefully you'll get some insight into the family dynamics of the separation and the reunification of families, which causes a lot of conflict in many cases, and also some knowledge of therapeutic interventions and what you can do to help these children and families. As she says, I am a retired social worker, but not really. I had some experience working at Pilgrim Psychiatric Center as a bilingual psychiatric social worker, and some part-time medical social worker. I worked at Huntington School District, as she said, for 18 years. I am a bilingual therapist part-time at South Shore Child Guidance, where I work with immigrant families. And I'm also an inventor. I invented a board game to work with immigrant families and children, and now I'm presenting as well. So I'm really not retired, I'm just changing the focus. So the faces of immigrant children, these are 2 children that I actually worked with. I'm sorry this is kind of light, but these are 2 children that I worked with in groups in my school where, at Huntington. So like I said, the 4 areas of concern we're going to go through is pre-migration, migration, post-migration. And the new current issue, which is a big one for many of our children and families, is the immigration status and the anxiety of deportation with the new administration we have in the government. So why are they coming? Pre-migration. They were coming initially just like any other immigrant to the United States, looking for a better life, better education, better opportunities, a safer living environment. But what they're really coming now is because of the violence in Central America, which has taken over many urban and suburban areas. Oh, hold on. Whoa. Okay, no. What do you do there? Okay. Honduras is the #1 murder capital in the world. Although I think recently I heard that El Salvador is coming up and matching Honduras or past Honduras. And you can just see Salvador is up there, Guatemala. There's a lot of gang violence, drug cartels. I'm going to interject a few stories, true stories of students that I work with. So a lot of these young kids are being recruited to the gangs. So I had one kid, one student of mine, in 5th grade, sitting in his classroom, and a gang member comes in and starts yelling at the kid next to him and says, "Why didn't you come to the meeting? We told you you had to come to the meeting." And he said, "I don't want to be a gang member. I'm not going to the meeting." And the gang member took out a gun and shot him in the head right there in front of all the other students in the classroom. Of course, everyone left and running out, traumatized by this experience. When his parents found out about this, they sent for him because they were afraid that he was at that age where they would start recruiting him. So there's a lot of sexual violence, gang members sexually abusing young girls, forcing them to become their girlfriends and whatnot. I had a girl, student, 12 years old, who was given a cell phone by a gang member and told, "Every time I want you, you have to come to my house. Otherwise, I will kill your grandmother." And she did that for about a year until she broke down and finally told her grandmother. And then the grandmother called the mother up here and they sent for her. Very traumatized young lady that I worked with. Police corruption, they really don't follow up. Women will go to the police station saying they were raped or whatever, and they look the other way. The other reason why they're coming is because of the family separation. Now the parents want their kids to come up and be reunited with the family. So that's another reason. So what happens? So all these issues occur. Families, the father usually comes first, then the mother comes, they save money, and then they bring their children up. But when there's a crisis such as the gang violence and so forth and the raping, the parents will get money together from other family members and send for their children. So the kids are waiting year after year for their parents, waiting, waiting, waiting. By this time, 3, 4, 5, 7 years have passed. These children now are being raised by their aunts, their grandmothers, or other family members, and who they consider their parents, who they consider their mother or their father, because now they haven't seen their parents for so many years, they don't even know who they are. So parents will send the money down, they get a coyote, and a coyote is a guide who's paid $3, $4, $5, $6,000 or more. The more you pay, the easier the trip. So if the parents can only afford $3,000, these kids will be walking at night, going through mountains, through rivers, sleeping during the day, going through hunger, a lot of things. If they pay more money, they tend to ride more in cars or in buses and so forth. They stay in nicer hotels. The other people will stay in stash houses, as I will show you. So I just want to show you, this is the one video I'm going to show you, and it's a young man talking about his journey coming to the United States. Can they lower the lights? I don't know. Oh, and I'm not endorsing.
The drug cartels are seeking out young people, are threatening them to join or to die.
If they talk to you and they tell you they're going to kill you or your family or anything, they're going to do it.
Children are afraid to walk to school, to even cross the street. The cycle of violence has grown to be something that is so monstrous, so cruel and out of control that people are left with no choice. Murder runs rampant in the streets. Honduras is now the murder capital of the world.
For many of them, they say, either I'm going to die here or go into the gangs, or I'll take the risk. I may not make it to the United States, and I know the risks, and the families know the risks of the desert and the train and the La Bestia and crossing the border. But they say, I have to take the risk.
It took me a month and 3 days to come here. You don't get to drink enough water or food.
Yo tengo 16 años y la parte más dura que fue de mi viaje fue cuando los dejaron perdidos en el desierto.
People ask how could a family send their child north? And it's a good question, and they do it with heavy hearts. It's not an easy thing to send off your child, but they do it because of the danger that's in those communities and the lack of possibility for the children. So just like Moses was put in a river to save his life, children are going north.
Nobody would like to really do that like again. If they did it once, I wouldn't like to do it. I wouldn't do it.
No sé, yo creo que caminó como unos 3 días.
Tomó 2 meses.
One of the greatest commands that inspires us, the words that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves, to love that child as my own. It is what we are about as Christians and as Lutherans, loving and serving the neighbors that God gives to us. Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, along with our national network of partners and the Lutheran churches all across the U.S., are at the forefront of providing foster care, of being with these children as they move towards being reunited with their family members who live here in the U.S.
I am in high school, I'm a senior, and yeah, I work after school from 5:30 to 9:30.
If everyone can have a seat, please. We're about to have dinner. Let me know if there's not enough chairs. Thank you.
America's a nation that has not only welcomed immigrants across decades, but is actually a nation that has been renewed by immigrants again and again. Our nation and our communities, our churches too, are stronger for immigrants being among us.
I want to be an architect. You might not believe it, but like I love math. Like when when they give you a problem and you don't know how to do it, it's just like, oh, what am I gonna do? And just like, I gotta do it. And just like stay there, look at the paper, try to understand the words, and you just get it, and then you just feel like that's the best feeling. When you just like do it, and you're like, I did it by myself.
What I take away, and I want you to take away, is that these children are very, very resilient. They've been through hell and back, and yet they still see that they can have a future here. The dreamers, as you know, are fighting for their lives because they know that their life, their home, their family, everything is here, their future, they've studied, they've gone to college. These children, once they get it in their minds that they're going to study and they're going to do it. And so I like to show that. So the Northern Triangle, as you can see, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, that's Long Island is getting mostly El Salvadorians, but we also have a big influx of Hondurans. And if you look at the different pockets, I've done presentations in different areas of Long Island, and some areas, like in Patchogue, have more Hondureños. In Huntington, where I work, there's more Salvadorians. I know in Freeport, now that I work there, it's a big Dominican population. So they tend to go where their family and their friends are, and that's how they set up. So they go through all of here through Mexico. One of the things that he mentioned, and one of the things you saw in the video, was the train. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So like I said, they come with these coyotes, these guides, these polleros. They have several names, nicknames. Sometimes they come alone with the polleros. Sometimes they come with other groups of people. Sometimes they come with a family member. It can be a host of different ways that they're coming and with whom they're coming. It takes usually 4 to 6 weeks. So these kids are on the road, crossing mountains and rivers, sleeping, like I said, at night, and it usually takes 4 to 6 weeks. If you're working with an immigrant child, you don't initially want to say, are you documented or undocumented? But a way of finding out whether they're documented and whether they went through this horrendous trip is you can just ask them, within conversation, how long did it take you to get to this country? And if they say a month, 3 weeks, then you know they went through this journey. If they say they just got on a plane and they came, well, then they didn't go through this journey. Although some of them, once they pass into the United States, they might get on a plane, so you really have to ask them the total amount of time that it took to get to this country. I had a student who was crossing with her 2 other sisters, and when they got into Mexico, the oldest sister, the 14-year-old, went to buy food. When she came out, her sisters were gone, and the immigration police in Mexico had caught them and sent them back to Salvador. And so this sister stayed in Mexico by herself for 3 weeks, waiting for her sisters to come back again, and she just ate out of garbage cans, slept on benches, and so forth. So like I said, very resilient, they're determined. They come in all modes of transportation. It could be cars, it could be buses. The train is called La Bestia, we're going to get to that. While they're walking through the different countries, immigration police in each country can stop them and deport them back to their native country. One student of mine saying that he was walking with his cousins and immigration police came, put a gun to his head, and said, give me your money. And because they know they travel with money. So the police took their money, and then, you want to say nice, the police gave them back some of their money, took part of their money, and sent them on their way. But this young man really thought that he was going to die, that he was going to kill him right there with, when he had the gun in his head. This is, I used to do many groups with the immigrant children. It was the best way to address all their needs, is to do groups with them in school. So this was a 4th grader who drew a picture of her experience. And her experience is that this was her cousin, 13-year-old cousin. She was over here, of course, 4th grader, she did a lot of racing, didn't draw too well. And these were 2 thieves, one with a knife that put the knife to the 13-year-old's neck and said to the mother, give me your money. And the mother faked that she had a heart attack, threw herself back on barbed wire fence, holding her chest, faked that she died, and the young thieves took off. But this little girl drew a picture of this, so I would imagine that she was a little traumatized by this experience, seeing that the knife was at her 13-year-old cousin's throat, and she thought her mother had died. These are just few of the many, many stories these children have told me. They hide in buses, in trucks. Jessica hid in a box truck up here. They put in a hidden compartment at the top, her mother, her 2 siblings, and it was so hot they thought they were going to die, they were going to suffocate. unfortunately, they made it through and got out of the truck before they actually died. This is La Bestia. So not all the children come on the Beast. The Beast is a train that travels all through Mexico. It is a cargo train. They jump on and off the train. And the reason they have to keep jumping on and off the train is that every time the train pulls into a town, they have to jump off because the immigration police, all the gangs, are waiting for them there. And so they jump off the train before it pulls into the town. They run around the town, and then when the train starts moving, they jump back on the train. But, you know, there are the gangs on top of the train, stealing from them, pushing them off the train, raping the young ladies. So it's a very, very dangerous thing. One of my students who did come on the train said that they had to stay awake for many, many hours because, one, fear of falling off, two, the fear that someone would steal their belongings. So they have to be very vigilant while on the train. Also beware of the branches that can knock them off. We don't have time for that. Along the way, they stop at what's called Casa de Migrantes or bodegas, and these are so-called safe houses where they just get a time to rest. They might have some mattresses on the floor, some hot food, but the young ladies said that these places are horrendous, that there are a lot of men, young men, that might be drinking and so forth. So it's a really, really scary place, and for them, it's really not a safe house. But it is a place for them to take a shower, to rest before they go on to their next part of the journey. So one of the last parts of traveling all the way through Mexico is they have to cross the Rio Grande. So if the Rio Grande is very rough, that it rained a lot and it's very rough, they have to stay on the side of the river and wait until the waters calm down. People have tried to cross the river when it's rough and they drown. So one of my students stayed on the side of the river for a few days, waiting for the river to calm down. She was with a coyote. So now the new situation, I don't know how new it is, but one of the current situations on the river is that the gang members have taken control of the riverbanks. And so now the coyotes have to pay the gangs for safety. So once the coyote pays the gang members for safety, they stay in a certain area with all their people, and those people are safe. Nothing happens to them because the gangs are there to protect them. But the other people who have no money to pay the gangs can get robbed, beaten up, killed by the gang members. So one of my particular students, she was 13, was sitting on the riverbank, and dead bodies were floating up, and she was seeing this. She was seeing people being beaten up and killed on the side, and she was traumatized. So they cross, as you can see, on tubes. If they're good swimmers, they might swim. They have to take their shoes and their pants off and cross over. So Jennifer was a student who was crossing over with a coyote, and this coyote told them that they had to strip completely. And since her and her cousin didn't know any differently, they stripped completely, crossed over on the tubes naked. Then when they crossed to the other side, he said, okay, put on your clothes, and I'm going to take you to a safe house on the other side of the United States. When he got to the safe house, or they got to the safe house, he told them to go into a particular room, and fortunately for them, a woman came out of the house and said, no, those women are staying in my room. They're going to be with me tonight. So you can only imagine what could have happened to these young ladies had they gone to the room with the man. So this is a drawing of a sixth grader who drew crossing the river. This is the raft they were on. It was her aunt, and two cousins, and the coyote and two other men. And they were crossing. And when they got to the other side, there was a snake, which is a really bad omen for many Hispanics. A snake is like the end, you know, oh my God, you know, things are going to be really bad. When I asked her about the heart, I said, why'd you draw that heart there? Because I found it unusual, right? And she said, I knew once I got on that raft that my heart would be forever left in my country, that I would never be the same, that part of me will be always in El Salvador, even though I'm coming to the United States for a better life. Very profound. I was like almost in tears when she said that to me. So two things can happen once they cross the border. They can get caught by immigration, ICE in the United States, or they don't get caught and they continue their journey with the coyote. So Brenda was caught by ICE She was sent to a detention center. We're going to talk a little bit about the detention centers in a minute here. Let's see. Yep, here we are. One of the detention centers are called La Hieleras. And the reason they're called La Hieleras, the icebox, is because they're very, very cold. 3/4 of the building is built underground. There are no windows. The lights are on 24/7. They have all these just benches. You can see they have these thermal blankets if you're lucky to get one. They stay there until they can be processed by immigration, or if they're overcrowded, they'll send them to other detention centers that are not cold, like the icebox. They sleep there. They get given cold sandwiches, some water, and that's about it. They can sleep on the floor if they like, but the lights are on 24/7, so after a while they lose track of what time it is. Once they're processed by immigration, the young, anyone under 18, will be sent to either another detention center or foster care homes. Foster care homes that are paid by the federal government to take care of these children, to provide for them, to send them to school until the parents are contacted. The same thing with detention centers. They're sent to detention centers until parents can be contacted and everything can be processed. So some children say foster care homes were good. Some of them say they weren't so good. They didn't get enough food. The same thing with detention center. One young lady told me that they actually sent it to Florida. And these detention centers are all over the United States. So once they're processed in Texas, they can be flown to Minnesota, to Florida, to Texas, to Arizona. So they're all over. I think you know that on Long Island we have one at Mercy First that was in the paper about 2 years ago. So they're still taking in immigrant children there. One student told me that the detention center in Florida was wonderful. They started school, they took them on field trips, they gave them clothes, so it was a really nice experience. But she cried every day because she was all alone there. She was separated from her cousin. They came together. Her cousin went to one detention center, she went to another. And the reason why the children stay in detention centers for different lengths of time is because the detention center then contacts the parents. So the parents have to pay a fine for their children enter the United States undocumented. They also have to pay for the airfare for their children and an escort. So if they're under the age, I think, of 15, they have to be escorted on a plane. The detention center cannot send them alone. So the parents have to pay for the children and the escort. And so some parents may not have the money right away, and so until the parents pay that money, these children will stay in detention centers. So if you're working with a student, child, they might say, oh, I was only in a detention center for 2 days. Someone else might say they were there for 2 months, and that's the reason. So this was a detention center in 2014 when we had the 65,000 young immigrants coming through the border. They were overcrowded. They didn't have enough places and spaces for them. So you can see how horrendous it was. So a quick story. I did this presentation in a district, and one of the social workers told me that one of his students had a practice lockdown. And if you know what a lockdown is, if you don't work for the school, a lockdown is because of all the shootings going on in schools. Now schools have drills of lockdowns where the students have to all cram into the corner of the room away from the door so that in case someone's in the building, they won't be seen. And so they had this lockdown exercise, and this young lady who didn't speak English was pushed to the corner of the room by the other students and crammed into the corner where she had a panic attack. And when the social worker was called from the other building to interview her, he said, what happened? What caused this? And she said, when they pushed me into the corner, it reminded me of this, because she was one of the students in one of these overcrowded detention centers, and it just brought back that memory, and she had a panic attack. Okay, so if they cross the border and they don't get caught, then they have to continue their journey in the United States, where they might walk in the desert for days. One of my students was given a group of them were given gallons of water, 2 gallons of water each, and cans of food. They were taken to a cave, and left there, and he said another coyote will pick them up. Sometimes coyote will transfer them to another coyote and another coyote. So they didn't think twice of it. They went to the cave, they waited. 1 day went by, 2 days went by, 3 days went by, and now they're freaking out. Now they're having panic attacks. Now they're like, Lords of the Fly, let's go. We're going to die here. No one's going to pick us up. Fortunately, someone did come and take them, and they were safe. There are also stash houses in the United States where they go, they're taken. That's the last step. They're sent to the stash houses, and then the coyotes contact the parents in New York, California, wherever the parents are, and then they proceed to make arrangements to drive them across the United States to their home. Sometimes the stash houses are raided by immigration, by ICE, and anyone over 18 will be arrested. Most of them will be deported. Children are not deported back if they're from Central America, from those 3 countries, because in 2004, President Bush passed a law saying that any undocumented minor has to be given their day in court because they could be, anything could have happened to them, you know, I forget the name of it, but if they experience violence, sexual attacks and so forth and so on, then they have a right to stay here. So they have their right to go to immigration court and fight their cases. Once they're caught, they are then allowed to call their parents, then the ICE contacts the parents and so forth. And then the last part of the journey, like I say, once they contact the parents, they either get in a van or a car, and they're driven up through the United States. And usually they say it's a group of people where they just start dropping people off all the way up until they get to Long Island. I did put this picture in. It was one boy in my group who drew this picture because he came documented. He came on a plane. So remember, not all of the immigrant students come or children come undocumented. There are some that come documented. So these were 3rd and 4th graders who weren't very verbal to talk about their experience. So I just asked them, all right, just write one word that described one part of your journey. And these were the different words, the Rio Grande, fake. One student had a fake that he was the son of the coyote, so the immigration police wouldn't take him. Some were happy, some were sleepy, because sometimes they walk at night, so they're very tired and sleepy. Fearful of getting caught, hungry because they don't get enough food, cold because at night in the desert it gets very cold, tired from walking so much, and so forth. All right, so post-migration. Remember, we got the pre-migration, migration. Now we're going to talk about post-migration. So once they're here, you would think, okay, great, everything is going to be happy. They went through this journey. They finally met their parents again after so many years of separation. Sometimes there is happiness initially, and then other things start to brew. And this is where many times you might get these students in therapy or coming to a social worker or psychologist's office because they're starting to feel different things and they don't know what to do with these feelings. They might act out, they might cut school, they might start fighting, and you don't know what is really going on. So a lot of these students, when they see their parent, I keep saying students because it just stays with me as a school social worker, they feel a lot of loneliness. I had students who just isolated themselves in their bedroom because they didn't know their parents. Their parents were total strangers to them. There was no connection. The parents were angry that they spent all this money to bring them up here, expecting these children to show affection and love, and they can't because their parent is the grandmother or the aunt that raised them. So part of your work will be for them to help these children understand they have 2 sets of parents, to acknowledge that their aunt or their grandmother or whoever raised them is truly their parent, that the love and the cariño, the affection that they got from these surrogate parents is true and real and should be validated. But you also have to work in the process with the parents here in terms of them understanding that these children need time to reconnect with them. And the children need to understand they need time to reconnect with their parents. There's change in family composition. Sometimes the parents end up getting divorced up here. They remarry. They have children up here who are documented. They're half-brothers, half-sisters. So there's a whole host of things that could happen once they get here. Zaida was a student of mine who I worked with her in 5th grade. She maintained contact with me throughout her years in the school district. And when she graduated, she invited me to her graduation, and I went. And she told me that she was still not connected with her parents. This is 6 years. Why? Because the parents used her basically as a babysitter to babysit her two half-brothers and to clean and cook in the house and all that because the parents worked long hours. But she did go to college. She was going to college, and she said when she graduates, she's moving to Florida because the family that raised her in her country are in Florida. And she was going to go be reunited with them because that's who she felt. This is unusual. Many times the children take a year to adjust and then everything is okay if there's help, if they get help. They also have a fear of deportation once they're here. If they're caught at the border, they have to go to immigration court. If they do not get caught at the border, then there's no immigration court. So they're living undocumented here. They're going through a sense of not belonging. They were in their country, they spoke their language, they had their culture, their food, their music, their family. They come here and right away they say they feel the racism, they feel like they don't belong, they feel like, you know, why did I come here? I should go back. They're totally in culture shock. Their anxiety about entering school. They have no friends, they don't know English, how are they going to pass their classes, and so forth and so on. Full of anxiety. Already went through that. Okay, so animosity, the last one. Sometimes, many times, there's animosity between the children who were born here, who are citizen children, and the children who are undocumented, who are non-citizen children. Because the non-citizen children know that the citizen siblings have all the rights in the world to stay here, to go to college, to work, to get a driver's license. And when the non-citizen children become of age, 16, 17, many of them don't realize that they came very young, that they're undocumented. And it's at that point that they find out they can't get a driver's license, they can't go to college, you know, a lot of roadblocks. And it's a whole nother issue at that age. They think they're coming here to spend time with their parents, and their parents are working long hours to survive. And so these children are left home alone a lot of times, feeling more isolated than they thought they were going to feel here. Like I said, mixed status families. We have some families where one parent is documented, the other parent is not documented. Some of the children are documented, some children are not. We call those mixed status families. I have a great example, but we don't really have time. Let me see. We have time. What I want to do is, if I can get through this, I want to give you an example of a case that I just finished working with so you can get a good flavor of it. So let me see if I can get this. So this was a girl who was pulled out of her house by a gang member at the age of 12 and taken to his house where she was raped. Her uncles went to the house to rescue her. The gang member pulled out a gun and started shooting the uncles. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. The girl, during the commotion, ran out the back door, ran into her uncle's arms, and they whisked her out of there. She was taken to another town, another family member, and within a week, her and her younger sister were brought to the United States. This is something that she wrote. Sometimes I have problems with my mother, and you can see her broken heart and a sad face. This mother started, unfortunately, physically abusing them because they were going through their own trauma, not adjusting well, having all these things in their head, having depression, and the mother was expecting them to be happy and normal and cleaning the house and do all those things. So I worked a lot with this family. Fortunately, everything worked out. And this young lady, and when I talk about resiliency, this young lady, she came in 7th grade. By the time she got into 9th grade, she was one of the few ESL students that passed the science regents. So I was so happy for her. She's very, very bright. She didn't want to get follow-up therapy for the rape. I'm hoping, I told her in the future, maybe that's something for her to remember. But at that point, she didn't want treatment. I did the best I could as a school social worker. Again, right now, the biggest fear of deportation. We're having children as soon as our president won. My former psychologists and social workers in my district were calling me, what can we do for our kids? They're coming to our offices fearful that they're going to be deported, full of anxiety that they might get picked up at the bus stop, that they might go home and their parents won't be there. So there's a lot of anxiety. Of course, you have to acknowledge the anxiety. You have to talk to them about it. You have to try to find out if anyone in the family was deported. Is it real for them? Because if it's real, then you need to really call the parents, because a lot of times parents talk openly in front of the children about everything that's going on, about the deportation, about the raids, and they are happening on Long Island just like they are happening across the country. So those fears are real. You need to speak to the parents and tell the parents not to discuss these things in front of the children. It's just like when 9/11 happened and parents had the TVs on, 24/7, like the news, and these kids were coming to school full of anxiety. There is a point where parents have to realize that children cannot take in so much news and so much fear, because they take it in and it becomes their own. And unfortunately, parents do get deported, and you will have to address that with the children. Okay, talk about that. Sometimes there are attachment disorders. Kids who parents left them as infants, never bonded with their parents, and they have this attachment disorder. They just have no connection with their parents. They become using drugs or drinking, maladaptive, cutting out of school, not doing schoolwork. Those are really the tough cases where the connection between the parents is not there at all. Time for that. So why are they entering in school with anxiety? Like I said before, not knowing English, no familiar faces. They're afraid they're not going to make friends. They're afraid they're going to fail classes. They're unfamiliar with the school system. One of the things when I do this presentation to school districts is I tell them they should have a separate orientation every September, because many of the students come during the summer when the weather is fine through Mexico in the desert, that they should have an orientation and teach the children what is the code of conduct in the school district. What is truancy? What is a PINS petition? What are the grades? What are the expectations? How do they learn English? They learn English social first, then academic comes later, 3 years later, 4 years later. It's normal to have a hard time learning English. To relax their anxiety, and also to let them know, in your country, you didn't have to go to school maybe. In your country, if you fought, they kicked you out and you didn't come back to school. Here, it's totally different. What is suspension? What does that mean? Kids need to learn that because they don't have it in their schools in their country. Like I said, if they start to get into maladaptive behaviors, into drugs and alcohol, we don't have a lot of time to deal with this, but I do want to touch a little bit on this. Latinas in high school have the highest suicide attempts of all races. Okay, much of that has to do with the cultural divide between the mothers, their Latina mothers raised in their country who come here, who maintain the culture, who maintain the woman's role, where the girls here, once they start learning the American way and learning to be more independent, want to hang out with the American friends, go out, go to the movies, and parents and fathers, particularly fathers, don't want them out. This starts causing a lot of conflict between the young lady and the parent, and they get depressed, they start cutting, now they're cutting, and unfortunately suicide attempts. All right, so is that enough? Did I give you enough information? So that's just the tip of the iceberg. But so engaging and assessing. One of the things I want you to take away from this is that when you're engaging Latino families, there is what we call simpatía. It's a social professional relationship. If you go in there acting like you're the professional and you know it all, you're going to lose them. You are going to lose them. You need to do chit-chat with them. So how are you today? It's a beautiful day out there, or it's a terrible day out there. Just be social with them in order to engage them. After a while, they're going to see you as a family friend, and that is normal. Initially, they might shake your hand or just say hello or whatever, but after a while, they might actually kiss you on your cheek when they see you. I had one family who the little son was ADHD, cute as a button. The mother was totally out of sorts, didn't know what to do with this young boy, and so thank God that she followed through on all the things that I taught her, and she saw results. After a while, she started telling the little boy, kiss Miss Matos, kiss Miss Matos. So, I had to bend down, the little boy kissed me, because that was their way of saying thank you. That was their way of saying, you're part of us. We appreciate everything you have done with us, for us. So don't take offense to that. They might hug you when they start connecting with you. All very normal. If you're not used to that, it might be a little uncomfortable in the beginning, but go along with it, because the more you go along with it, the more they're going to connect with you. There is a stigma for therapy. If you can stay away from therapy and just say counseling, or you just want to help the family through a difficult time, it'll be better. If a lot of them come in with, I am not crazy, I don't need therapy, why am I, coming here? You have to work with that. You're not crazy, you're having some issues with your son. My job is to help work things out so that you guys can be happy and go on your merry way. I don't expect you to be here forever. You can say that, because they don't want to be coming forever. No one wants to be coming forever. But if you can at least say, this will not be a long-term treatment, depending on the case, of course. I mean, you'll use your judgment. If it's a sexual abuse case or something, it may be longer. But you have to explain these things. The other thing that's really important, many of them do believe in spirits and spiritualism, and they will, light their candles and all that. You have to go along with that. If they talk about it, discuss it with them and approve it in a way that is, I understand it's part of your culture, and that's good. I'm glad you're doing that, because if that's what you feel will help you, that's great. Don't say it's voodoo or whatever and it's not going to do anything for you, because they'll never come back. This is a great picture to display simpatia. She has her arms around the family is smiling, and this is how to engage them. All right, so just to regroup a little bit, assessment consideration, you're going to assess pre-migration, what happened in their country, the departure. Sometimes these kids are not told that they're leaving. And one night they said, okay, get your backpack, put some clothes in, because tomorrow morning you're going to the United States, you're going on your trip. So they had no time to process, to say goodbye to anybody, and they're left with the sadness because they weren't allowed to say goodbye and process the whole departure. So that's an important part to ask about. The migration, did anything happen to them on their way here? Initially, they might not share some of the scary parts, and then with trust, they will start talking like a bird, singing like a bird. Post-migration, who is the client in the family? What are the issues? Maybe everyone in the family has different issues. Family dynamics, the reunification, how is that going? Sometimes I give them exercise or activities to do where a daughter and a mother is not connecting, the daughter's staying in the room, and I'll say, okay, maybe on Saturdays you guys can go to the store together and just talk about what you need to buy and stuff like that, and start little by little giving them those types of activities. Legal status, you don't want to really come out in the beginning if you don't have trust with them to ask them their legal status. That will come, but like I said, if you can just ask about how long was the journey, that will tell you that they're undocumented. Cultural bereavement is also part of the departure. When they get here, it's just like a loss of a family member. The loss of their culture, their family, their food, their music, their countryside if they're in the rural area. That is cultural bereavement. It's actually a condition, something that you have to address also, and the deportation fears. Some of the things that you can do to make it easy to get them to speak is to do a family tree, a genogram in the beginning. Just say, you know what, I need to really get a good picture of your family. Let's do this drawing, and we'll put in your picture of your family, not a picture, but your names of your parents, how old they are, what country they're from, and then from there the children, maybe the grandparents, and then who raised you, which aunt, and so forth. And you get a nice picture, and just from that, kids will start talking more about their experiences. The travel odyssey we talked about, the home stressors, talk to these kids about what's stressing them the most at home. legal status, acculturation level, what food do they prefer, what language, some of them you might get into therapy or treatment or coming to your office after a year or 2 years of being here. And then the maladaptive symptoms start coming out or the depression starts coming out. So you really need to review everything about them in those areas. So these are the things that I've seen many times: the depression, general anxiety, separation anxiety, attachment disorder, PSD, I got it backwards, the cultural divide between parents, cultural bereavement, cutting, suicide, and alcohol and drug use. Interventions. I can only say eclectic is you just have to use a little bit of everything. Not one thing is going to work. Depending on what they're going through is what you're going to address. Sometimes you have to be creative, like I was if we have some time, let's see, we might have some time. I'll quickly go through some of the activities that I designed for the groups so you can see how you can get them to talk about what's going on. Family therapy, you have to address the needs of the children and the needs of the parents because that is what's causing conflict. You cannot isolate, just see a child without seeing the parents because the parents are going to, of course, give you a different side of the story. And only with the two of them or the three of them, I say mostly two because usually you see one child and the mother, because father's usually attending are working long hours, don't tend to come to therapy, but if you ask them, they will, but it's usually the mother. So this was one of the things that one of my students gave me when I retired. I don't know if she wrote this. She got it from the internet, but I thought it was profound. When the darkness in your journey impedes you from continuing, remember, here's my hand to help you in your journey. These kids just need a lot of support and empathy and understanding. Sometimes it's just a matter of letting them just talk. Let that cathartic experience just happen so that they know someone is listening and understanding them. This is my mantra. I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. So, we can't save them all. I did groups during 2014. We got such a big influx in my district that my groups went from 5, 8 to 20. And so I would just push into the ESL classes. I worked with the teachers. They were really kind and wanting me to go in because they knew that these kids were hurting. And so once a week I would go in and do all these different activities with them. And it really, really helped. I just went to a conference. I did a presentation at Nassau Community College, and I ran into 3 of my former students. And it was so sweet to see them. They're in college. They're undocumented, but they're working long hours. That's the other thing. Many of particularly the young men, work in the evenings. As soon as they're 15, 16, they can get jobs as busboys or dishwashers. They're working, and they're working from 5:30 to 9:30 to 10:30, sometimes 11:30 when they shouldn't be, but they do because they need to help their parents pay the rent and for their own. They want phones, they want clothes, so it's not uncommon to see that. Let's see. So this was my last year. I give them certificates of participation so they feel like they achieved something. Many of these students don't feel like they've achieved anything in school because their grades aren't that great in the beginning because they're still learning English. So I just want to validate them and give them certificates of participation. You can't see this picture very well, but there was one student that came a month before, came in May, and really didn't participate other than I think 2 groups with me. I gave him a certificate, but he's not very happy like the other kids. Can anybody see him? I mean, I know it's not a good picture. It's really hard. Right here. He's just standing there, like blank, right? But look at all the other kids. If you can see, it's not clear, but they all have smiles on their faces. They're all leaving to go to 8th grade happy and feeling good about themselves. I get them. Oh, here's another thing that you might want to try in therapy or just working with them is have them, after trust is built and you've talked about a lot of the issues, have them write this story. So part of, like in March, I would give them sentence starters. For some of them who don't like to write or have a difficult time writing, I would give them sentence starters, and they just fill in the blanks. Others who like to write would just go right ahead and write their stories. And then we would go to the computer room, they would type it all up, they would download pictures, they would give a title page, and then I would have them share their story in front of the class. At the end of the year, by May or June, they're sharing their story. That was totally voluntary, but I can say that the first 4 or 5 that had the guts to do it, after that, one by one, they all went up to do the story. And it was just a nice closure for the group. And then I would give them these certificates. So I just want to talk a little bit. This is a game that I designed on my journey to the United States, Mis Pasos a los Estados Unidos, because I went online looking for something to help these children open up in a fun way. In schools, we use a lot of board games for social skills building, anger management, all kinds of games that you can find online, and there was nothing. I kept looking and looking and looking for years, and I couldn't find anything, and I said, you know what, maybe it's time. I had enough experience working with these children to know what they went through, their stories, so maybe I can design a game. And I did. So I designed a game, and they throw the dice, and they start here, and they go down the path. Depending on how much the dice they throw, they move. And if they land on the blue, they take a blue card. That's questions about the changes between their country and this country. How are the schools different? How are the houses different? How is the culture different? Just anything about change, the food, anything. If they land on the red, they take a feeling card. How did you feel the first day of school? How did you feel when you saw your mother for the first time after years of separation, and so forth and so on? And then the yellow would be the journey, questions about their journey. There are 2 sets of cards. Set 1 is really for caseworkers or teachers. They're not really in-depth questions. They're really like icebreakers. And then set 2 are for therapists to work with these families, because those questions are more in-depth. And you don't want teachers dealing with rape and murder and all that kind of stuff. So, so that's it. And there is a spinner that comes with the game. So if they land on spin, they hit the spinner. They love the spinner. They love hitting that stupid little arrow that goes around. And those questions are just questions about their country. Nice, like, what's your best memory? What's the food you miss the most? To talk positive about their country, because we all know that there's so much going on in their country, and I just like them to feel proud of where they came from. So that's that. Support groups, individual therapy. Do we have time? Let me see. I'm going to go really, really fast, and then I'll give you 10 minutes for questions, okay? I'm going to go through some of the, you have to also, like anything else, confidentiality is really important to discuss during the first session, especially if you work in a clinic, to let the child know that you're not going to share anything with their parents unless they give you permission, because you want that trust there first. And then, of course, your job would be, if it's something that you need to discuss, try to get them to get to the point where they allow you to discuss it. Of course, if it's suicide, hurting you, hurting someone else, whatever, blah, 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 you can't keep the confidentiality. I start the group with having them write their card, their name on a card, they put their flag on it, then we open the card up, it's an index card, and they open up the cards, and I ask them 10 questions, 5 questions. What country did you come from? Who did you live with in your country? Who was your best friend? Just icebreaker type of question, and they all talk about that just to get them to know each other and whatnot. Then I had these conversational topic cards. I just wrote them on cards, put them in the middle of the table. They picked the card, and they discussed those things. Always in group, I always said they had the right to pass on any activity or any question or anything that they, in the board game or here, because you don't want them, if they're not ready to discuss it, you don't want them to feel like they're obligated to discuss it. So it was the consensus of the group that if someone said pass, no one would bother them. You could pass and go on to the next person. We talked about the differences. I give this out, and we talked about the differences between their country and this country and the similarities. Again, just to get them to open up and talk about the cultural differences, the differences in school, whatever. temperature, weather, so forth and some. Again, the school and community rules, how it's different here from their country. This is the family tree that I get them to also do in group, just for them to get to know that every family is different and it's okay, and also to realize that they were all, many of them, raised by different family members. So, orientation of cultural differences, we talked about some of the differences in the cultures. And particularly for kids, I had to teach them, when a teacher speaks to you, an adult speaks to you, look at them. You have to learn to look up and listen and respond when they ask you a question, because they are taught when they've been reprimanded to look down. And they're not to speak unless spoken to by the parent, and the parent tells them directly to answer. So that's one of the things I teach them. One of the things I teach the teachers when I do the presentation is that kids are taught to look down, and it's not a disrespect to you. Actually, it is a form of respect to you. So don't take it badly when a student looks down, and don't answer. You have to say to them directly, Jose, please tell me why, blah, 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 blah. I need to know. Sex education. It took me a few years to realize that these children, when they come here, they're in ESL classes 2 or 3 periods a day. When they're in ESL, ENL, now it's called ENL, English is a New Language, they miss out on some of the other classes. And one of the classes they miss out is on health. And these children are many are very, very ignorant about sex. And so we had Planned Parenthood come in, they did a presentation, and the things that these kids were coming out with blew me away, realizing that they're very, very ignorant on how to protect themselves, STDs, how do you even get pregnant? Very, so it's something really important to remember when working with them. I use different books to have them read if they wanted to read, again, voluntary. If they didn't want to read, that was fine, just to talk about different experiences. Different games. I found a few games. There's emotional bingo. They do have it in Spanish, which is really good. So they played emotional bingo. If they had on the card, instead of numbers, they had the emotions. If they land on sad and they had it, tell me something that makes you sad. If they landed on angry, tell me something that makes you angry. It's a great way to get them really to talk about their emotions in a fun way. The nurturing game is another one. Okay, let's see what else. This is playing games. A letter to a loved one is one of the ones that I also did, where a lot of them didn't say goodbye to their aunts or to their grandmothers, the people who raised them. So there's one point where I give them the opportunity to write a letter to the loved one they left behind. One boy in 7th grade started crying, and I felt so bad. And again, I always say it's voluntary. And I said, listen, you don't have to do this. If this is too hard for you, you don't have to do this. Remember, it's voluntary. He said to me, oh no, I want to do it. I'm just sad because I miss her so much, and I realize how much she did for me, and I want her to know that, and I'm going to write this letter and send it to her. So this was very cathartic for him. These are the sentence starters that I talked about in terms of writing their own story, the country they lived in, who they lived with, what did I do to have fun, my best friends were, what was I doing when I found out that I was leaving, so forth and so on, so you can do your own. And this is an actual one of the stories. And this is where they shared their stories. I'm going to end there, but my experience with the majority of these kids in school was they initially want to go back, they don't want to stay here. As the months go on and they start to adjust, then they start saying by the end of the year, I want to stay here, but I want to go back just to visit. Most of them. It was only that one female student who told me she doesn't want to stay with her parents, that she wants to leave. So there's that. So I think that's it. Okay. That goes into another presentation. So we have a few minutes. Questions? No question. Ah. Uh-huh. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, great. Great. Thank you. There is pamphlets up here on presentations that I do. I do presentations to schools, to mental health clinics, conferences. You can look at the game. There's information on the board game. And for anyone who filled out for the email, I will email you information on some of the immigration resources that are out there that you can give to families. There's a book resource done by Long Island Wins, is also a resource book on all different types of services on Long Island for immigrant families. So I will send you that through email. It may take me a few days to put in all the email addresses and stuff, but I will send it to you. Thank you for coming. I hope you learned something.
It's just the thing I like about you. Just the thing I like about you.